Welcome, family and friends of the Willows Church. We are glad to see you.
Dave, we can't see them.
What?
We're just looking at a camera.
No. Shh. Don't let them know. But if we get just the right angle, we can actually see them sitting there watching us. Hello. How you doing?
Well, today we have a special guest speaker, Justin Napier, who's the spiritual care coordinator at the Gateway of Hope right here in Langley. Justin has a master's degree in systematic theology and Old Testament studies from Regent College, which combined with his experience in ministering to a diverse community as a chaplain, gives him some valuable insights into what it means to live well and to love well.
And Justin also likes sunsets and long walks on the beach. And he gives me his old books to add to my home library.
Yeah. We have a call to worship today from Proverbs 2, verses 6 to 10. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds victory in store for those upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you.
This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your very word spoken to me, and I'm desperate for you, and
So today we're going to read from two different passages. The first one is an Old Testament reading. This is from Exodus 22, 21 to 27. And then we're going to look at Matthew 22, 34 to 40. So let's start with our Old Testament reading first. You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. You shall not abuse any widow or orphan. If you do abuse them, when they cry out to me, I will surely heed their cry. My wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children orphans. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you shall not deal with them as a creditor. You shall not exact interest from them. If you take your neighbor's cloak and pawn, you shall restore it before the sun goes down, for it may be your neighbor's only clothing to use as cover. In what else shall this person sleep? And if your neighbor cries out to me, I will listen, for I am compassionate. Now we're going to look at Matthew 22, 34 to 40. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. A number of years ago, a friend and I drove around Langley in my Volkswagen bus to look for people who were tucked away in parks and under bridges. In my bus, we carried peanut butter, jam, bread, juice boxes, and any clothes of ours that we could spare. When we met someone, we'd ask them if they wanted a sandwich and if they needed some extra clothes. And a common response from the person would be, what's your agenda? Why are you doing this? I would usually respond with, there is no agenda, we just want to do this. But my response to this person wasn't entirely accurate. It wasn't false, it wasn't telling a lie, but it wasn't as clear as it could have been. I remember telling people who I could confide in at the time that I was responding to something that was happening in me. It wasn't simply an act of kindness, it was more than that. It was an itch that needed to be scratched. It was like a thirst that needed to be quenched. Have you ever had a moment where you wanted a certain kind of food and nothing else would satisfy your craving in that moment? Well, for me, that food is fried chicken, and the moment never ends. But that's the kind of feeling I had with wanting to help people. I couldn't ignore it. The best way that I can say it is, when I saw the poor, it felt as if their physical condition matched my spiritual condition. And I wanted them to know, as best as I could, that God loved them just as much as He loves me. And how I communicated that love to them mattered. And this is what we're seeing in Exodus 22. Read on their own, these instructions could just look like a list of rules that are no longer applicable in today's modern society. If anything, many of us within our modern frame assume that the welfare state deals with such issues as presented in our Old Testament reading today. So before we get into Exodus 22 and what it means for us today, let's talk about where Exodus 22 is situated in the scope of the book of Exodus. In Exodus 19, we find our context. Israel has been liberated from the oppression of Egypt for 3 months, and now they're at Sinai, a location where they spent almost 2 years, and it is at Sinai where Moses ascends to the mountain to receive the law. This is what is known as the Ten Commandments, as well as the Book of the Covenant. Throughout this section, Israel is continually reminded how God brought them out from Egypt. He heard their cry, He remembered them, and then He delivered them. The point here is Israel isn't just given an arbitrary rule book or abstract principles that they are expected to follow. Rather, the instruction they are given is grounded in a particular story. And this story would shape how they lived. In Deuteronomy 7, God tells Israel that his favor toward them had nothing to do with them in and of themselves. In fact, they are described as the fewest of all people. They were the undesirables. They were like the island of misfit toys in the 1964 Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Christmas special. They were unwanted. So it was nothing on their part that made them particularly important, so much as that God loved them and he made a promise to keep them. So Israel's identity story, their history with God, is one characterized by grace and redemption. And as a community in relationship with God, Israel was expected to put this story on display to the nations. And this was primarily understood by keeping covenant with God. So, going back to Exodus 22, I wouldn't say that we were just supposed to say copy and paste, as it were, these specific regulations into how we relate with others, and assuming that we're keeping covenant with God. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time seeing myself ever getting into a situation where I'm going to take a jacket off as collateral from someone who is in need of it, and then make sure that I give it back to them before sundown so that they won't be cold through the night. But what does this suggest? Well, it suggests that God is interested in how we treat others down to the minutiae of interactions. In this sense, following God is not a private affair. It's a way of life. It's to bear his name, representing him to others. It's not just during Christmas time that we show love, joy, peace, and generosity. True devotion cannot be confined to portions within the calendar. To follow God is a rule of life for the people of God. And Exodus 22 speaks into the divine imperative that we are expected to care for those who are in need. For God assures his people that they will be held to account for how they, and by they I mean we, treat the less fortunate. If someone were to ask you, what makes you happy? What do you think you would say? Some common responses are more money, a fulfilling career, a vacation, being a homeowner, to stay healthy. All these desires aren't bad in and of themselves. In fact, I think it's natural for us to want these things. And that's likely why there are common responses around questions pertaining to happiness. In January 2019, Pew Research Center compiled a number of surveys done on the relationship between religion, happiness, and civic engagement and health. The analysis found that in the US and many other countries around the world, regular participation in a religious community was clearly linked with higher levels of happiness and civic engagement. I won't get into the details of the analysis, and I encourage you to look it up for yourself. But it's worth noting that in general, regular participation in a religious community will benefit one's overall happiness. And aside from making social connections with other churchgoers, gathering together as a people in the shared drama of God's presence in the world reinforces the sense that we are involved in something that is bigger than ourselves, and it extends beyond us. And generally, when something is bigger than you, it will likely demand something of you. So Jesus, confronted by the Pharisees about the hierarchy of the law, gets right to the heart of the matter. Jesus says that the entire law, the Torah, which isn't just a bunch of case laws, and the prophets can be summarized in the divine imperative of loving God and neighbor. The two are not mutually exclusive. Of course, we have all heard this passage in Matthew countless times. And it is unfortunate that after a while, such a powerful word from Christ begins to fall on dull ears and wandering hearts.
But this is the demand that God has for his people, that we love our neighbor just as God loves us. It is also unfortunate that there are those who only focus on the aspect of loving our neighbor as truth-telling in a kind of matter-of-fact way. What I'm getting at here is the spirit behind such approaches as, I don't care if I hurt their feelings, or they don't like what I have to say. I have to remain true to the message because Paul tells us it's an offense. The reason why I say this kind of line of thinking is unfortunate is because it plays out more like someone is just trying to justify their own egotistical behavior than actually wanting to share and communicate the gospel. Many of us have this romantic image of someone like Paul preaching the gospel by going into the markets to exclaim that Jesus is Lord. But we should remember that Paul was actually criticized for being an ineffective public speaker. And moreover, just like in Paul's day, so today, it would be difficult to measure how many people come to Christ through soapbox-type preaching. Coming back to our passage in Exodus, we find the understanding that God's character is on display in our day-to-day interactions with others. Brothers and sisters, friends, I cannot stress this enough. It matters how we live with others, not simply what we declare to others. Or, as the author and Anglican priest Trish Harrison Warren put it, as Christians we are to be truth-telling because we want to name reality truthfully, but we also need to live reality truthfully. And living reality truthfully is to accept our social responsibility as Christians, trusting in the slow work of God and not assuming that having people understand God's love for them will happen overnight. But if the summary of the entire law is to love God, neighbor, and ourselves, how is it that we love our neighbor? Or maybe a better question to ask ourselves is the one that the lawyer asked Jesus in Luke 10. Who is my neighbor? This is a tricky question for us to answer because as connected as we are in our technological age, we are finding more disconnection from people who are quite different than us. It is all too easy to tailor all of our social circles to our common interests, to not be in any kind of relationship with someone who does not align with our own interests, values, and perhaps social class. But the funny thing is, we will have very strong opinions about those who we identify as not being part of our inner circles. The difficulty and convenience of our day is if you don't like your neighbor, you don't have to have them in your life. Augustine of Hippo said, the word neighbor denotes an object near to something else, and no one can be a neighbor unless he can be near. I think St. Augustine is onto something here. To be neighborly is to draw near to another, and we won't know who our neighbors are unless we take the risk of getting close to them. I like going to bookstores. I can spend hours in one. I like to pay attention to what the bestsellers are, what the sections of the bookstores, like which ones are growing. And I've noticed one in particular within a nearby bookstore that has grown exponentially. This is the wellness section, or what this store likes to call the wellness shop. The wellness shop has a number of subjects on offer to explore along with correlating items for purchase to increase one's productivity in living their best life. Some of the subjects offered in this section are meditation, self-help, psychology, and psychiatry, and nutrition. All these subjects are well and good, hence why they belong in the wellness shop. But what's missing from this wellness shop is a section dedicated to neighbor. We could say that the wellness shop for Christians has three primary sections: love God, love neighbor, love yourself. And all three of these, when done well, leads to a full life. Friends, Our work of charity is an expression of our faith. We are to be as charitable as we can with our neighbors, just as God has been charitable to us. And I would suggest that the way we love our neighbors says what kind of Lord Jesus is. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that extending to our love to our neighbor is easy. The call to a life of love is a lifelong task, which will involve a lot of failed attempts and lost opportunities to love our neighbors. But, as I mentioned before, we need to have faith in the slow work of God in us and others. As the theologian Stanley Hauerwas said, all what is needed on our part is to be willing to be surprised by what love turns out to be. So I leave us today with some questions to ask of ourselves. What story do we find ourselves in? Is it a story characterized by redemption and grace? And if not, why not? And if so, how are we communicating that story to our neighbor in word and action? Because that's the story they need to hear with their own ears, see with their own eyes, and touch with their own hands. God bless.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who